The first thing you need to understand about Red Hollow is this. The place looks harmless. Sunlit ridges, thin trails weaving through quiet woods. A map that suggests every path leads somewhere safe. But anyone who's lived in Morgan County long enough knows the truth. Red Hollow has a way of taking things and never giving them back. And that's exactly why this case hits people the way it does. 4 teenagers walked into those Tennessee woods in 2003. And for 22 years, their story sat in the dark like a locked drawer nobody wanted to open. Families waited. Detectives retired. Rumors grew. But the ridge stayed silent until now. This episode dives into the mystery that turned a peaceful summer campground into one of the South's most unsettling legends. And here's the part that pulls everyone in. Nothing about the scene made sense. The Rayburn cousins were smart, capable kids. Josh and Ryan grew up hiking that ridge. Amy and Caleb weren't reckless either. They'd planned the whole weekend down to the food and the gear. They weren't the type to get lost. They weren't the type to run. And they definitely weren't the type to disappear without leaving so much as a footprint. Yet their SUV was found locked at the trailhead. The campsite was half-built. A plastic cooler sat untouched beside the fire pit, and one of their old flip phones, the kind that barely held a charge, was still alive enough to hiss static into the fog. That detail still gets people. A phone that shouldn't been on, whispering into a forest that had already swallowed 4 voices. But this is where the real hook comes in. Investigators discovered details about this ridge that weren't on any map. Old tunnels, underground chambers, pads carved by hands that didn't want to be found. And when those details resurfaced in 2025, everything the community believed about that summer weekend cracked open. By the end of this story, you'll see why the arrest made this year didn't just shock the community. It forced everyone to rethink what Red Hollow was hiding all along. Because this case wasn't cold. It was buried. Before we step deeper into the case, you need to know who these 4 were. Because once you understand them, the weight of their disappearance hits a lot harder. Josh Rayburn was 19. The kind of kid who always had a camera in his hand. He filmed everything. His friends. His dog. Even the rain on his bedroom window. To Josh, everything meant something. He wanted to be a documentary filmmaker, and this camping trip was supposed to be one of those. Captured the memory while it's still alive, weekends before everyone split off to college or work. His older brother Ryan, 21, was the opposite. A mechanic with hands always stained from oil, and a laugh that echoed through the entire Rayburn house. Ryan didn't overthink things. It fixed him. If something broke, he grabbed a wrench. If someone cried, he showed up at their door. That's who he was. Then you had Amy and Caleb Walker, cousins on their mother's side. Amy, 18, was the studious one. Always early, always prepared. Her planner had color-coded tabs for every activity. Caleb, 20, was the outdoors guy. A quiet kid, but when he spoke, people listened. He knew the woods better than anyone in the group. He could read a trail the way some people read a newspaper. Together, the 4 of them were the kind of tight-knit group you see in old photo albums, arms around each other, grinning like nothing bad could ever reach them. On July 12, 2003, they loaded up Ryan's Ford Explorer with camping gear, snacks, firewood, a cheap cooler filled with warm soda, and a camcorder Josh wouldn't stop bragging about. They told their parents they'd be back Sunday evening. 2 nights. Simple, safe. But here's where the story gets eerie. Every one of their families mentioned the same thing later. Each kid had been excited, but also strangely sentimental. Josh had hugged his mom twice. Amy had cleaned her room that morning for no reason. Caleb had left a sketch on the kitchen table. Ryan outside, don't wait up. But he'd smiled in this odd, thoughtful way. No one thought much of it. Not then. They arrived at Red Hollow Ridge around 5:45 p.m. The sun was still high, the forest calm. They parked at the trailhead, joked about who was carrying the heaviest pack. Undead, Inawate, Didn't he know? What no one knew was that a man living less than a mile from their campsite had already been watching the ridge that summer. Kept notes. He tracked hikers. And according to investigators, he preferred groups no larger than 4. The Rayburn cousins weren't just going camping. They were walking into someone else's territory. Sunday night came and went. No mensajes? No calls. No headlights pulling into the driveway. At first, the families assumed the kids had stayed longer than planned. It wasn't unusual. Red Hollow had a way of messing with time. You go in for a day, and it feels like 10 minutes. But by Monday morning, panic replaced patience. By 8:10 a.m., Ryan's father had already driven to the ridge. He knew the truck. He knew the trail. He expected to find the 4 sitting around a dead fire pit, laughing about a late breakfast. Instead, he found the Ford Explorer parked exactly where they'd left it on Friday. No dents. No move. No signs they returned during the night. The engine was cold. The doors were locked from the outside. And here's the detail that stopped him in his tracks. Ryan's spare key hung from the ignition, the one he never left behind. The first responding deputy described the scene as frozen in time. Backpacks still missing. No signs of struggle around the vehicle. The dirt in front of the truck was untouched, except for the original tire marks from Friday evening. It was as if the foursome had parked and simply evaporated. But the inside of the SUV told a different story. Amy's watch sat in the cup holder. Caleb's folding knife was tucked in the side door. A crushed bag of chips lay on the back seat. Half eaten. Nothing valuable was missing. Nothing felt staged. And that's what made everything so unsettling. Scenes that are staged look neat, intentional. This one felt eerily natural, but completely wrong. Search teams arrived within hours. Volunteers, deputies, rangers who'd walked the ridge their entire lives. They spread out in grids, calling the kids names, expecting to hear at least an echo or a rustle. But Red Hollow responded with nothing. Not a single footprint near the trail. No broken branches. No dropped gear. Nothing to suggest direction, distance, or decision. And then came the strangest discovery of the entire first search. Ryan's old flip phone, resting on the driver's seat. When a deputy picked it up, a burst of static hissed through the speaker. Sharp, alive, almost electric. The battery screen showed 1 bar, but the timestamp told another story. That phone had pinged a cell tower at las 3:14, 29, hours after the 4 had vanished. A signal that shouldn't have existed, from a ridge with barely any reception, on a phone that wasn't supposed to be turned on. Whatever happened out there didn't happen fast. Someone or something kept that phone alive. By the 3rd day of searching, the case had already split into 2 camps. Those who believed the teens got lost, and those who believed something much darker pulled them off the trail. And the evidence, or the lack of it, made both theories look impossible. Deputies expected the standard signs of a hiking accident. Dragged soil, broken limbs, boot prints veering off the path. Instead, Red Hollow Ridge looked untouched. It wasn't just clean. It was pristine. Every trail marker stood straight. Every patch of moss remained undisturbed. Even the spider webs across the switchbacks were still intact. If 4 people had walked through that ridge after Friday night, the forest wasn't admitting it. But this is where the investigation tilted into something almost supernatural. Experienced trackers swore the ground looked reset. No depressions, no scuffs. Nothing to indicate a frantic run or a forced movement. It was as if the ridge had smoothed out after swallowing them whole. One searcher even said, "The woods felt like they were lying to us." And that line stuck, because the deeper the team pushed, the stranger everything became. The campsite was the biggest red flag. The tent poles were unpacked, but not pitched. The kind of halfway finished setup that suggested interruption, not choice. A few logs were stacked neatly as if they'd planned a fire, but the fire pit was untouched. Amy's notebook lay open on a rock with her neat handwriting describing clear night sky, Soft wind from the east. That meant she had written those words shortly after they arrived. Then she stopped writing. No sign of fear. No hint of trouble. Just a sentence that ended mid-thought. Investigators looked for animal attacks, but there was no blood, no torn clothing, no dragged material. They checked for signs of a fall, but the ridge's steepest drop-offs were empty, clean, and silent. They even brought in forensic botanists who examined the underbrush. Their conclusion: no significant disturbance. Whatever happened did not involve a visible struggle, and that led to the first major debate of the case. Did the four walk out willingly, or were they forced out through a route investigators hadn't discovered yet? Some locals insisted there were old moonshiner tunnels in those hills. Forgotten shafts. Secret chambers. Bootlegger escape routes dating back to the 1940s. Others believed the ridge hid underground structures not shown on any map. A retired hunter swore he once heard a hollow echo beneath the soil, like empty space under solid ground. But here's where things get even more unsettling. That flip phone, static. The 3:14 a.m. ping placed at least one of the teenagers alive many hours after investigators assumed they were gone. So if the four vanished willingly, why leave behind every piece of survival gear they packed? Why ignore the trail? Why leave keys, wallets, food, tools? The very things needed to survive 2 nights in the ridge. Detectives agreed on one point. TK didn't. Run from danger. Whatever they walked toward felt familiar enough to follow. This wasn't panic. It wasn't chaos. It was movement with intent. And that intent is what sent investigators into Act 2 of this case. A shift from search to something far colder. By the time the flip phone became the center of the investigation, the case had already crossed into territory no one wanted to admit publicly. Phones don't just turn themselves on. They don't just ping cell towers in dead zones. And they especially don't keep a charge for 30 hours. Without deliberate intervention. But that's exactly what this one did. The deputy who picked up the phone said the static sounded almost intentional. Not glitch. Not a dying battery. More like interference coming from a source nearby. The screen flickered. The timestamp blinked. And after a few seconds of hissing, the device shut off for good, as if whatever kept it alive had finally let go. When analysts pulled the phone apart, they found tiny grains of reddish soil embedded around the battery latch. The same soil found deeper inside Red Hollow, its older trails the cousins didn't take. Soil consistent with areas past the restricted zone, far beyond public hiking pads. That detail suggested someone carried the phone deeper into the ridge and then brought it back to the SUV. But here's the real gut punch. When investigators extracted what little data remained, they uncovered a single outgoing call attempt at 3:16 a.m. No number. No voicemail. No connection. Just an attempt. The call lasted less than a second, as if someone tried to dial, but didn't have time to finish. Could it have been Josh, Ryan, Amy, Caleb? Impossible to know. But the phone had been held by someone. That much was clear. And this raised the biggest question yet. If someone walked the phone back to the truck, why? To mislead investigators. To signal for help. To leave a clue. Or to send a message. The sheriff at the time believed the phone was placed purposely. Someone wanted us to know the case wasn't simple, he said years later. They wanted us confused. So, detectives pivoted. They stopped assuming an accident. They stopped treating the ridge like ordinary terrain, and they began considering the possibility of a controlled environment. A place inside the woods where the kids were taken or held. A place the original search grid never touched. And just when it seemed like the investigation had hit its first real wall, a small rumor from a nearby town cracked the case wide open. An abandoned service tunnel system carved into the ridge decades earlier. A system no ranger wanted to confirm, but none denied either. The static-filled phone wasn't a glitch. It was a breadcrumb. But the trail it pointed to wasn't above ground. It was beneath it. When the first 48 hours passed with zero sign of the Rayburn cousins, Morgan County escalated the search into one of the largest operations the area had ever seen. Rangers weren't just combing trails anymore. They were tearing through brush, crawling under deadfall, and marking every inch of ground with fluorescent tape. The ridge wasn't cooperating. It stayed still. To steal. What made this expansion so intense was the unspoken fear among the searchers. If the kids weren't found by now, they weren't lost. They were hidden. Helicopters swept over Red Hollow with thermal imaging. The screens returned nothing but cold terrain and animal signatures. Drones followed ravines, scanned the riverbeds, and hovered above the abandoned ranger cabin halfway up the ridge. Still, nothing. Every new angle investigators pushed into only highlighted the same chilling fact: for young people had vanished in a place where the earth should have recorded every step they took. That's when they brought in canine units from Knoxville. These dogs were trained to track everything: sweat, clothing, fibers, old footprints, even disturbed vegetation. But the reaction they gave stunned the handlers. The dogs froze at the halfway marker on the trail. Not a single paw stepped forward. Instead, they whined and circled the same tight radius, as if the scent ended abruptly, or something cut it off. One handler later described it as a scent wall, like they walked into thin air. But more was happening behind the scenes. Detectives set up a temporary command center at the trailhead. Maps, radios, timelines, and a giant corkboard filled with photos of the 4 missing cousins. They reconstructed the route the group likely took. They traced possible detours. They interviewed hikers who passed through earlier in the week. Every detail painted the same confusing picture. The cousins reached the clearing, started setting up camp, and then nothing. The break came from a searcher named Vernon Halley, a retired firefighter who had volunteered. Halley discovered a small depression in the ground roughly a mile from the campsite. Not a sinkhole. A purposeful indentation. The soil was looser, darker, and warmer than the surrounding dirt. When he dug deeper with a metal probe, it clinked. Not stone, not roots. Metal. The team excavated the area. What they uncovered was a rusted steel plate, roughly the size of a manhole cover. The edges showed signs of recent disturbance: fresh scrape marks, fingerprint smudges, and a faint oily residue. But the real shock came when they pulled the plate aside. A narrow shaft descended into darkness. Wooden beams lined the interior. Old, weathered, but solid enough to suggest human construction. Every deputy felt it. The air rising from the shaft was colder than the forest around them, almost refrigerated. The tunnel didn't match any official map. Rangers denied knowing about it. Older locals muttered about bootlegger holes, places where moonshiners once hid from federal agents. But this one looked newer, repaired. Maintained. Search teams wanted to go down immediately, but the sheriff halted them. The shaft was too narrow, too unstable. They needed proper equipment: cameras, gas detectors, structural support. The next morning, a specialized rescue crew descended the shaft for the first time. They reached a small chamber, empty, except for one item sitting dead center. A torn piece of fabric, navy blue, frayed at the edges. It matched the color of Josh Rayburn's backpack. The woods weren't lying after all. They were leading investigators underground. Once news of the underground chamber leaked, the entire county erupted with stories no one wanted to acknowledge publicly. Suddenly, everyone had a memory, a rumor, a warning their grandparents whispered about Red Hollow, a place locals avoided not because of wildlife or steep trails, but because of what people built beneath it. Morgan County has always had 2 histories, the one written in the courthouse, and the one passed down in porches and bars. And the second history is where the whispers about tunnels lived. Some old-timers swore moonshiners carved out escape routes during the Prohibition era. Others said the Army Corps used parts of the ridge for training during the 60s, leaving behind sealed vaults. But the chilling stories, the ones that resurfaced when the Rayburn case exploded, came from hunters who claimed they'd heard echoing footsteps underground, or kids who said they found strange entrances as teens, only to watch them disappear a year later. These weren't caves, not natural formations. They were structures made by people, strengthened with timber, reinforced with steel, built to hide movement in and out of the ridge. Detectives collected nearly 40 witness statements. Most were vague. Some were exaggerated. But a handful of details consistent enough to map out. What emerged was a crude outline of interconnected shafts stretching miles beneath the forest floor. But here's where the story takes an even darker turn. A former park ranger, known for keeping to himself, finally agreed to speak. Admitted AD found an illegal access point back in the late 90s. He sealed it. Reported Italiano, and was later told by someone higher up to drop the issue. When investigators pushed him for specifics, he hesitated, then said something that froze the room. It wasn't a tunnel. It was a passageway someone was still using. Someone, not something from the past. Someone active. He described hearing muffled machinery deep underground, faint lights flickering through cracks beneath the soil. And once, only once, voices echoing below, not echoes of hikers, not kids, adult voices, calm/conversational, as if underground life was normal. The sheriff asked him why he never told anyone else. The ranger answered, "Because every time I tried, someone shut down the conversation." This revelation reframed everything. If someone maintained the tunnels in 1998, they could have been there in 2003. And if they were there in 2003, they could have crossed paths with the Rayburn cousins. The theory shifted instantly. The ridge wasn't just hiding something, it was sheltering someone. Someone who knew the terrain better than any searcher. Someone who could move underground without leaving a trace above. Someone who wanted those kids. And if that was true, then the investigation wasn't heading into old folklore. It was heading straight into an active operation buried beneath Tennessee soil. The discovery of the underground shaft changed everything. But the moment investigators found the camcorder, the entire case flipped upside down. It happened on the 6th day of the renewed search. A tactical team was sweeping the chamber where Josh's backpack scrap was discovered. They checked every seam, every crack, every loose plank of soil. Then one deputy noticed something odd, a thin line of disturbed clay beneath a rotting support beam. When he brushed it aside, his glove struck plastic. Not smooth plastic, ribbed plastic. Something designed to be gripped. A camcorder.od, mud-packed. Batteries corroded, but unmistakably Josh Rayburn's model. The same one he bragged about before the trip. The same one he claimed could record even in low light. The camcorder was buried intentionally. Too deep to have been dropped. Too precise to be accidental. Someone hid it. Inside the command center, every detective leaned forward as the tech team cracked open the casing. The memory tape inside was warped from moisture, but salvageable. They ran it through a slow, careful extraction process, repairing corrupted segments, frame by frame. Hours later, a video finally played. The footage opened with Josh talking to the camera, smiling, panning toward the campsite. Normal, peaceful. You could hear Ryan laughing, Amy complaining about the bugs, Caleb adjusting the tent poles. Just for kids starting their weekend. No fear, no tension. Then the recording cut abruptly. Static, vertical lines. Audio distortion. A faint mechanical hum, like a generator far below ground. Then another image surfaced. A shaky shot of the woods at night. The camcorder pointed toward trees, swaying in the dark. The flashlight beam flickered, revealing faces tense and confused. Someone whispered, "Do you hear that?" And then, silence. The next clip was even shorter, just 2 seconds. A low corridor, dirt walls, wooden beams overhead, a single hanging bulb in the distance, and a hand, not one of the cousins, briefly entering the frame. A thick wrist, a ring, a pale scar across the knuckle. Then the tape cut again. That was it. No screams, no chase, no final message. Just fragments, like someone recorded pieces of a nightmare and then tried to erase the evidence. But here's the twist that experts immediately caught. The timestamps on the clips didn't match. Some were recorded Friday night, others early Saturday morning, and one of them, the corridor clip, was timestamped just 1 minute before the mysterious phone pinged that same hour. Same window. Same movement pattern. Meaning whoever held that camcorder was also the one carrying the cell phone. Investigators ran frame analysis on the hand with the scar. They compared it against every suspect ever connected to crimes in 4 surrounding counties. That's when they noticed something chilling. A retired park employee from the early 2000s had a matching scar. He'd vanished in 2007 after a property dispute, allegedly moved out of state, and was never heard from again. But his last known residence, less than 2 miles from Red Hollow Ridge. The camcorder wasn't just evidence, it was a message in the dark. A breadcrumb left behind by teenagers who realized too late they weren't alone out there. And the worst part, someone tried to bury that message, where no one would ever find it. Not nature. Not a coven. A person. Someone alive. Someone confident. Someone who believed the ridge belonged to them. T-Stape. Didn't he just escalate the investigation? Detonated it. When the camcorder footage leaked within the investigation team, detectives expanded the search perimeter beyond the forest. They targeted abandoned homes, hunting cabins, and private lots bordering the ridge. They wanted structured pattern. Motivam, but what they found instead was a map that should not have existed in any rationale. Explanation of the case. A land surveyor named Tessa Morgan was clearing brush on a property 3 miles from Red Hollow when she discovered a rusted lockbox wedged under an old tractor chassis. The metal was cracked from weather, the hinges half-eaten by rust. Inside were only 2 items, a faded Polaroid of Red Hollow Ridge and a folded topographical map covered in handwritten notes. Detectives unfolded the map on the command center table, and the room went dead silent. The map showed the ridge as it was drawn in official records, but layered with red ink lines that didn't match any documented structures. These lines traced paths, routes, underground connections, shafts branching off into private land, riverbanks, and abandoned farmland. The exact tunnel outline locals whispered about, but far more detailed. But what chilled investigators wasn't the network. It was the annotations, symbols, time marks, and dates. Most of the dates were from the 70s. 80 segundos, 90 segundos, but the last entry, circled twice. Read. July 12th, 2003. Group of 4. Someone knew the cousins were coming. Someone tracked them. Someone marked them on a private surveillance map before they even arrived on the ridge. The handwriting was tight, almost architectural, not frantic, not scribbled, controlled. A person who planned, a person who studied terrain like a chessboard. Detectives traced land, ownership records for the property the box was found on. The last deed holder was a man named Harlan Vickery, a quiet survivalist known for building illegal structures. He vanished in 2008, supposedly moved to Missouri, but no trail of him was ever found. No bank, no ETH, renewals, no employment, nothing. As if he'd gone underground, literally. But one detail stood out. Viscery had once been detained by park rangers for trespassing in restricted parts of Red Hollow. The rangers let him go, because he claimed he was mapping old tunnels for a personal project. This map was that project. And the circled date? It wasn't random. The sheriff described the moment best. It wasn't a search map. It was a hunting map. The implications were devastating. The disappearance wasn't an accident. It wasn't a wrong turn. It wasn't nature reclaiming for hikers. It was premeditated, lugged, planned. Whoever built the tunnels watched. People moved through the ridge like a predator watching prey cross an open field. And on July 12, 2003, the Rayburn cousins stepped directly into the sightlines of someone who'd been waiting for the perfect group, the perfect size, the perfect moment. T's map didn't just shift the investigation. It revealed the truth. The ridge wasn't hiding a killer. It was designed by one. The discovery of the surveillance map pushed investigators toward one critical question. Was Harlan Vickery still alive and living somewhere inside the ridge? Agents widened the search to surrounding counties, digging through forgotten databases, scanned documents, even local festival archives, looking for any trace of him after 2008. That's when an intern from the sheriff's office spotted something odd. A blurry man in the background of a 4th of July parade photo from 2013. Photo wasn't even meant for the case. It was part of a community history project. But in the back row, standing under a shade awning, behind the marching band, was a tall figure with the same squared shoulders, same facial length, same hairline, and most notably, the same scar across the right-hand knuckle. The exact scar seen in the camcorder footage. The intern flagged it. Detectives ran facial ratio analysis. It wasn't perfect. Cheap camera. Poor lighting. The 68 points matched known photographs of Viscery. That's enough for a probable identification in cold case review standards. Meaning, Viscery didn't go missing. He didn't move out of state. He didn't disappear. He stayed close. Close enough to watch a parade. Close enough to blend in. Close enough to visit town every few years without anyone noticing. But here's what made investigators freeze. In the same parade photo, across the street, stood a woman pointing toward the marching band. On her wrist was a medical bracelet. At the bottom of the image, the timestamp indicated she died 2 weeks later on a hiking trail bordering Red Hollow Ridge. Her case, ruled accidental fall, never reopened. Detectives enlarged the photos. Her gaze wasn't on the band. She was looking toward the man under the awning. Vickery. And her body was found less than 300 yards from one of the unmapped tunnel entrances, circled on his surveillance map. The implication was clear. She recognized him. Noticed, and she didn't survive the week. The team re-examined every recorded death near the ridge across 20 years. Slips, falls, animal attacks. Exposure. Expos were reclassified as suspicious proximity. 7 happened within 24 hours of hikers being reported missing. 3 happened within 10 minutes of recorded phone pings. A pattern no one saw, because no one thought to overlay the ridge with Viscery's secret tunnels. And then came the most gut-punching realization. The Rayburn cousins weren't his first victims. They were simply the only ones people kept searching for. Investigators circled back to the camcorder footage, the shaky video of the corridor, the hand entering the frame, that scar, the time stump. Then they zoomed into 2030 in Parade Man's hand. Same scar, same width, same bend, same surgical indentation. 10 years apart. Say, man, this chapter of the case forced detectives to confront what they'd been resisting. They weren't hunting a missing park ranger. They were hunting a serial predator who hid underground literally and legally. The camcorder was no longer a clue. It was a confession taped by accident. And the map was no longer a tool. It was a blueprint of decades of unreported crimes. But the part that shook the investigators the most, if he was alive in 2013, he could be alive now. And the ridge was full of places no team had searched in 20 years. Places he built, places he controlled, places where 4 kids vanished without leaving a body. The hunt for Viscery was no longer historical. It was active, and it was about to lead to the most terrifying discovery of the entire case. Tunnel 6B wasn't supposed to exist. Not on county maps, not on park records, not on any geological survey. Not on park records, not on any geological survey. Conversations no one should have been able to hear until the truth hit them. Viscery had been below them, directly below their campsite, listening through vents and stone conduits. He built years earlier. He didn't stumble upon them. He tracked them. Dud. The journal's final page said something that made every investigator step back in stunned silence. They were not the first. They will not be the last. I follow the ridge's design. It knows who belongs. It knows who trespasses. And it has already chosen the next one. The timestamp on that last line, April 2025. Only 3 months ago, meaning he hadn't stopped, meaning he was still active, meaning someone alive right now was already marked. And level 2 wasn't his hiding place. It was his headquarters. The team looked at one another, adrenaline spiking. If this was level 2, then the real nightmare was what waited below it. Because scribbled in the margins of one journal, in small, nearly hidden handwriting, was one final note. Prepare. Level 3. Level 2 was supposed to be the end of the mystery. The place where Viscery hid, planned, and operated. But standing in that domed chamber, surrounded by journals that documented 2 decades of disappearances, investigators felt something else settle in the room. A realization, a weight, like the ridge itself was pushing down on them. This wasn't the lair of a desperate fugitive. It was the control room of a man who'd been running along. Calculated system. A predator with a blueprint. Agents continued scanning the chamber. Behind the notebooks lay an old drafting table. The kind used by engineers in the 90s, wood frame, iron base, tilted surface. On it sat a massive hand-drawn map. Not of the ridge above, not of the known tunnels, but of something deeper. It looked like an inverted tree. Thick central shaft, branches curling outward, twisting into chambers, alcoves, and pits. Measurements were scribbled everywhere. Angles, soil densities, symbols no one could decode. Every section labeled with years, some dating all the way back to 1998-5. Years before the Rayburn cousins ever entered the woods. This was the part that made even the hardest detectives go silent. The map was marked, Master Level, Revision 12. Revision 12, meaning he'd updated it again and again, refining the design, strengthening the structure, expanding the reach. Level 2 wasn't an improvisation. It wasn't even the beginning. It was just the place he used to manage the rest. The true foundation was below. An agent whispered, "He built a city down here." Another replied, "No, he built a system." Pinned next to the master map were smaller sketches. Blueprints for sound funnels carved into stone, diagrams of ventilation shafts disguised as natural cracks, and notes on how vibrations traveled between floors. Notes like, pressure changes, detect movement, sound rises. Fear travels with it. Shallow breath can be heard 30 feet through sandstone. But then came something worse. A binder labeled Profiles Priority. Inside were detailed records of hikers, campers, geologists, surveyors, anyone who had spent extended time near Red Hollow. Ridge from 2003 to 2024. Each profile included photos printed from low-grade cameras, distances tracked, and evaluations of behavior. One section was labeled qualities. Another was labeled candidates. Profiles of 4 faces stopped the team called Josh, Ryan, Amy, Caleb. Their pages were thicker, more detailed, marked with repeated phrases such as resilient, observant, strong group dynamic, worth testing. Testing. The word alone sucked the warmth out of the chamber. Somewhere inside these tunnels, Viscery had built a twisted evaluation system, selecting victims not because they were vulnerable, but because they were strong, because they could endure, because he wanted to see how long they'd last underground in a labyrinth, designed to wear down the mine. It wasn't about killing, not at first. It was about control, experimentation, domination. Every profile ended with a final line. Outcome, filed. Filed meant the same thing in every case. The victim was never seen again. But the Rayburn cousins file had an extra notation. Outcome. 4. Lock. Lack. Lock. No one knew what that meant. Not yet. Then an agent saw a smaller, leather-bound book lying half-buried in dust. Inside, a diary. Personal. Confessional. Written in a colder voice than any official journal. The last entry read, 3 levels are nearly complete. Level 1 protects me. Level 2 guides me. Level 3 will outlive me. It was signed, V. Investigators looked toward the shaft leading downward. The air rising from it was ice cold, as if pulled from the lungs of the earth. If Level 2 was the blueprint, Level 3 was the execution, and they had no idea what waited below. The entrance to Level 3 was nothing like the engineered shaft between Levels 1 and 2. This one was narrower, almost organic, carved with asymmetrical strokes that suggested it wasn't made with tools alone. It sloped downward in a long spiral, swallowing light as fast as the flashlights could produce it. The deeper they went, the more the air thickened. No movement, no breeze, just heavy stillness. Like the tunnels were holding their breath at 50 feet, the walls changed texture. They became smoother, polished almost, as if hands had brushed against them for years. At 70 feet, investigators reached a metal gate fused into the rock, welded shut, reinforced with crossbars that looked hand-forged. Someone had tried to keep Level 3 sealed, or to keep something inside it. Cutting through the gate took nearly an hour. When it finally fell, the collapse sent vibrations echoing down the unseen corridors beyond. The sound didn't behave like normal acoustics. It seemed to fold in on itself, bouncing back in uneven pulses. One agent muttered, "Places shaped to scramble your senses." He was right. Level 3 felt like a maze built to disrupt perception. A labyrinth designed to break the mind before the body. The first chamber was lined with stone. Columns, too symmetrical to be natural, too crude to be decorative. Between them lay shallow trenches filled with ash. At the far end, investigators found old rope bindings, metal hooks embedded in the wall, and carvings that looked like fractured timeline states scratched repeatedly, over and over. Some crossed out violently. Then came the second chamber. This one was worse. A wide circular room, mori, carvings, more marks on the floor. But in the center stood a 6-foot monolith of solid rock, deliberately positioned, shaped by chiseling and grinding. On its face was a single word carved deeply. Listen. Everyone froze. The chamber was silent. Until it wasn't. A faint tapping, a slow, rhythmic pulse, coming from the monolith itself. The sound rose up through the stone like a heartbeat. Tap, tap, paus, tap, tap. Morse code, or something else. The team stepped closer. A geologist placed his palm against the stone, eyes narrowing. These aren't echoes. Something below is hitting the foundation. Below. Meaning level 3 had a basement of its own. A level beneath level 3. And someone, or something, was moving. They pressed on. In the next corridor, investigators discovered remnants of abandoned sleeping areas, piles of shredded cloth, broken containers, and bones. Human bones. Dozens. Some old, some disturbingly recent, scattered like someone had lived among them without caring what they rested on. A behavioral expert whispered he wasn't just hiding down here. He was rooting himself, becoming part of this place. The final chamber was different from the rest, colder, heavier, oppressive. A massive stone arch marked the entrance, with 3 engraved words. The final lesson. Inside the chamber, they found what they'd feared most for carved recesses in the wall, each marked with initials. J, R, 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 C, R, J, O, S, H, Ryan, Amy, Caleb. The recesses were empty, but not clean. The stone bore deep claw-like scratches and dried mineral stains that suggested a violent struggle years earlier. Just as the weight of the room settled in, a small recording device embedded in the wall clicked to life. Its battery, wired to a handmade copper coil, still had charge. A distorted voice filled the chamber. Viscery's voice. You wanted the truth. The ridge dosen that take people. People choose the ridge. Fear chooses them. Strength chooses them. And you came too late to learn what they learned. Silence. Then one final line. Level 3 isn't the end. It's where you begin to understand me. The recording shut off. Investigators backed out slowly. Some felt watched. Others felt listened to. Everyone felt the same thing. Viscery wasn't gone. He was waiting, and they were getting close. The team emerged from the final lesson, chamber shaken, cold, and more aware than ever that they were moving through a world someone else had designed. Viscery's world. A world that felt alive in ways stone shouldn't feel. Pressure in the air. Wait. In the silence, the faint sense that their footsteps were no longer theirs. Alone. Back in level 2, where the air was at least breathable, they regrouped around the evidence table. T. Journalists. T. T. Sketch. T. D. Maps. All of it pointed to one conclusion. Viscery wasn't improvising. He was escalating. And he wasn't hiding in level 3. He was beyond it. Agents pulled every log they had on Viscery's past childhood records, military files, psychological evaluations, and suddenly, the pattern formed. Vickery grew up in Morgan County, son of a miner. Bareli, social, obsessed with underground acoustics, even as a teenager. Teachers claimed he could hear pressure changes through walls, a strange talent that didn't make sense until now. His father died in a mine collapse when Vickery was 16. Everyone believed the boy barely survived, but new evidence suggested something different. He didn't just escape the collapse.
He used it. Blueprints from the journals matched sections of the abandoned Harriman mine, sealed in 1987 after the disaster. Vickery had taken those old tunnels, reinforced them, modified them, and tied them into his new system under Red Hollow Ridge. He wasn't building from scratch. He was expanding a ghost. Then came the detail that blindsided everyone. Vickery had been declared legally dead in 2004, after a survivalist accident that supposedly swept him into a ravine. The very year after the Rayburn cousins vanished. Which meant one thing. He had erased himself intentionally. A tactical disappearance. A way to move underground without anyone looking for him. An intelligence analyst flipped through the journals again and found an entry dated just 6 weeks after the Rayburn disappearance. Death frees the architect. Architect. Not fugitive. Not murderer. Architect. But the most disturbing revelation wasn't about Vickery's past. It came from Elias Carr, the rescued surveyor, who regained enough strength to give a longer statement to detectives. He described seeing Vickery occasionally through cracks in the tunnel walls. Sometimes silent, watching. Other times chanting low, rhythmic patterns, like he was listening for the ceiling's answer. And once, only once, he saw something that made his voice break as he recounted it. He built a room lower than anything else. He'd go there for days. I heard him talking down there. Talking to someone. Except, there was nobody else alive. The medics leaned in. Who was he talking to, Elias? Elias shook his head slowly, the color draining from his face. I don't know. But he'd say things like, tell me what comes next. Or, show me who it chooses. Like he believed something inside the ridge was guiding him. A geological expert dismissed it as hallucination, but the others weren't so sure. The deeper they explored these tunnels, the more it felt like logic had limits down here. Meanwhile, thermal sensors posted throughout Level 2 began picking up faint irregular heat signatures, not human-shaped, not consistent, but drifting, moving, like something brushing past deep air pockets. Someone said it out loud. He knows we're here. Another added. And he's steering us. They radioed the command post on the surface. Reinforcements were sent. Specialized cave units mobilized. But everyone knew the same terrible truth. Once you went below Level 3, you weren't operating on your own terms. You were operating on his. And Chapter 16 ends with the moment the lead investigator lifted his flashlight toward the shaft to Level 3, and saw a small piece of paper pinned to the wall. Fresh. Clean. Not there before. On it, written in tight, efficient handwriting. You're almost ready. Signed simply. V. The team re-entered Level 3 knowing Vickery had been inside the tunnels recently, hours ago at most. The paper proved he was close enough to watch them, close enough to place a message within arm's reach, and confident enough to do it without fear. He wasn't running. He was preparing. Flashlights cut through the shifting dark as they followed the monolith chamber, the stone carved with that single chilling command, listen. This time, they didn't focus on the echoing taps. They focused on the floor. Earlier scans had suggested voids beneath the chamber, but the data was muddy, interference, density shifts, vibrations that didn't match any known geological activity. But now, standing together, in silence. They felt it. A faint movement of air from below. Not a breeze. Not a draft. A breath. Deep. Slow. Rhythmic. Like the earth itself inhaled. One investigator knelt, placing his palm to the stone. Something's moving under us. The others followed suit. Their hands touched the cold floor. And they all stiffened at the same time. There was pulse under the chamber. Not metaphorical. Not imagined. A real, slow, heavy pulse. The geologist whispered. This isn't natural. This chamber, it's built directly above a pressure cavity. But the rhythm, that's not geological. They pushed deeper. Past the monolith. Past the bone chamber. Past the carved recesses matching the Rayburn initials. In a narrow corridor beyond the third arch, one agent spotted a series of vertical slits along the wall, one every few feet. Air flowed through them in a steady, controlled pattern. They weren't cracks. They were vents. Engineered vents. One investigator exhaled sharply. He's aerating something down there. They followed the airflow until the tunnel opened into the largest chamber yet, a cavern dropping at least 60 feet below the walkway. Carved platforms spiraled downward in a helix shape. The bottom was shrouded in darkness so thick their beams couldn't cut through it. And then, from that darkness, a voice whispered upward. Not loud. Not panicked. Not even aggressive. Measured. Calm. Almost conversational. You shouldn't have come this far. Vickery. His voice carried perfectly, as if the chamber had been acoustically designed to funnel sound toward anyone standing at the top. The team froze, forming a perimeter, flashlights aiming in every direction. One agent shouted, "Show yourself." Silence. Then a soft tapping drifted from the darkness below, the same rhythm from the monolith, but now louder, closer. Tap, tap, pause, tap tap. The behavioral specialist murmured, "He's signaling." But not to us. The lead detective leaned over the railing, peering into the void. Vickery, step into the light. The response floated upward like a secret being shared. The ridge taught me this place. I listened. I built what it asked for. I preserved its silence. But you. Another tap echoed. Then another. Then dozens. The chamber was responding. Not with voices. Not with words. With sound. As if the structure itself was knocking back. The air shifted suddenly. Small stones rolled across the walkway. Dust descended from the ceiling in thin, trembling streams. The geologist's face drained of color. The pressure's changing. A deep resonant groan rose from the cavern floor, like metal bending, like stone exhaling, like the entire ridge shifting its weight. The chamber's pulse quickened. And Vickery's final words before the lights flickered were, "You found level 3. But there's one more lesson you haven't learned." The chamber shook. Something below began rising. And every agent instantly understood. They weren't alone in that darkness. Someone, or something, was coming up.